Hey guys, welcome back to the show. I'm Mike Urban. This is the Mike Urban Podcast. I'm here with the Executive Director of Massachusetts Fiscal Alliance, Paul Craney. Paul?
Thanks for having me join your show, guys.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, man. I'm happy you're here, and I'm happy that we're able to uncover some of the things and some of the topics that we're going to talk about today. So, first of all, let's start with voter choice.
Okay.
That's something that you guys advocated against back in 2021, was it? Or 2020?
2019 and 2020.
That's what I thought.
And then more recently.
Yeah. So based on what I know, it's this voter choice, ranked voter choice, this is not that common throughout the country. There's only 2 other states that have this, right?
Yeah, 2. Right now, just 2.
And just so for the people that are watching, what does it entail? What is the difference between how we normally vote versus this?
So you are now opening a can of worms. And
that's why we have the podcast.
And I think this is the hard part for it. It's called ranked choice voting. Another way to call it is instant runoff voting. They call it the same thing. Most of the time now they call it ranked choice voting. But honestly, one of the demises to ranked choice voting is it's so complicated. So you're asking what should be a very simple question. Like right now, when you go to vote, you have 1 vote, usually for 1 election. Everyone understands that 1 man, 1 vote, 1 woman, 1 vote. Ranked choice is like, where do you even start with this?
Yeah.
You go into the ballot box, and let's just assume there's more than 2 candidates. You know, that's kind of like what they want to focus on with ranked choices when you have a lot of people running. And you're supposed to rank your candidates from like 1 to whatever. You have 10 candidates, 1 to 10.
Right.
And now in your head, you're probably thinking, okay, I can rank things. And the proponents of ranked choice are always like, let's just rank ice cream. Do you like vanilla chocolate, Rocky Road, mint chip, on and on and on. Well, and then they say, since you can rank things in life like ice cream or sports teams, whatever it may be, candidates shouldn't be that hard. But here's a problem. It is hard. Voting elections is not for everyone, and studying all the candidates and their positions and then forcing the voters to go out on election day to rank all the candidates in every election that's before them, now it becomes quite a chore. It's a homework assignment.
Yes. And
that's why it suddenly gets a little bit complicated to answer that question. But I am going to dive into it with you. We're going to go through it.
Yeah.
But for the sake of Massachusetts voters, they made the right choice. It was a ballot question in 2020, and it was rejected 55-45%. It was a resounding victory for the people that were arguing against it. It was a typical like David versus Goliath story. Mm-hmm. The folks that were for ranked choice voting came in with like, I think, $10 million. They had every celebrity politician endorsement you can imagine. And the no side, which was led mostly by my team and I, and a bunch of wonderful volunteers, had, I think, like $7,500 versus $10 million.
that just goes to show you the power that people could have against these things. You don't need money in order to...
Money doesn't mean victory all the time.
Correct, exactly.
Yeah. But so I'll put on my pro ranked choice voting hat for a second and tell you what they would say. So they say, if you are going to an election and no one gets a majority vote, so 50% plus 1 vote, it instantly goes to an instant runoff election at that moment. And that simply means when you go to vote, if the result isn't a clear majority pick, ranked choice voting kicks in. And what it does, through some kind of computer machine, it tabulates all of the rankings for all the candidates. And it will spit out a candidate who then has a majority vote. So it finds a majority vote for a winner. And the only way it works, because clearly there wasn't a majority vote candidate in order for ranked choice to kick in, the only way it works is by discarding votes. So you as a voter, if you don't pick the last 2 candidates standing in the final election in your rankings, your vote is discarded. That's how it finds a clear winner. So I like voters who will go to the ballot box and choose between two candidates.
Right. That's the, let's say, less complex way of voting.
Really
that's with
clear.
the majority of the country.
Yeah.
That's how we vote.
Really clear.
And I would think that if this passed, and maybe this is something you know, maybe it's something that you don't. If something like this passed, you're talking about cost to educate voters, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about cost to the voting systems, right? The computer systems, training the staff, training the people in order to learn how to use said systems.
Mm-hmm.
So you're voting in something that is more likely. I mean, I don't have the statistics in front of me about what is necessarily more sound in terms of voting, but I think that it's a hard thing to calculate because it confuses people.
Oh, it
right?
absolutely does.
It confuses people. And then you have all of the costs on the back end of implementation of said system, right? And the taxpayers are more than likely going to have to pay for that, right? Yeah.
And it also, with election, most part, who's going to win election night for the most part. And if it's so close, you have a recount. And again, people can go there with, I don't know if you ever participated in recount, I've done it before.
Yeah.
You're really counting ballot by hand. And it's very clear and obvious for everyone that's doing it. With ranked choice, it's expected it could take days, maybe weeks to get a winner. Yep.
So not only do you have to go through all this stuff on the back end to get this to work, you confuse the voter, number 2. And number 3, you don't even know who's the candidate that's going to win for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and it's not like you can go there with your team if you're one of the campaigns and say, I want to do a recount, and physically see the ballots and count it, by hand. It's all done through a machine, and, not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I like the traditional way of counting the ballots.
Yeah, some traditional things are better.
Yeah.
Let's just call it what it is.
It's transparent for everyone.
Yeah.
And the great thing about a lot of these recounts when they're so close is everyone understands someone won. It's pretty obvious. But when you throw everything into these machines and the machine tells you who won, it's just not the same. You
know what's really crazy about when I was doing a little bit of research on this is I really didn't understand, like, Massachusetts is primarily a blue state, right? It's controlled, it's blue. Mm-hmm. Why would they want to circumvent the voting that they already have? You know what I mean? Like wouldn't this, what I'm trying to say here.
Like if you're a Democrat, right, and it's a blue state, if it's not broke, why fix it, right?
Correct. That's what I'm trying to ask. Like, why try to implement something and confuse your voter base that is primarily voting for you anyway?
Well, I think you just answered your question.
Confuse them more?
Confuse the voter base. No, I think this is very appealing for political activists because it allows them to kind of put more of a thumb on the scale to try to get outcomes they want.
Yeah.
It's definitely a political activist game. And I can go through some examples of how that actually plays out in real life that we've seen in other elections.
Yeah.
But hardcore political activists like this, and I would say it's nonpartisan. If you go to red states, you hear about ranked choice because on that side, it's the red states who want to kind of game the system some more. But in Massachusetts, it would be the political activists on the left who want to figure out a better way to get their candidate to win.
So do you think that there's a higher probability, like based on what you just said, do you think that there's like a higher probability of it being less effective or like providing less clarity or transparency in the voting?
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely less clarity, less transparency.
That's what we're known for.
Yeah,
right.
It's Massachusetts.
It's and that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
The whole legislature, we rank like almost last in terms of transparency in the legislature.
Yeah, I mean, as we're doing this podcast, as we speak, I can tell you as a fact that not all legislative votes are made available to the public.
Yeah.
That's how bad it is. The joint committee votes, every law that is passed has to go through a joint committee. And those votes are not available to the public as we speak. So you cannot access who votes on joint committee one way or another right now.
It's when you really think about it, and thank God for organizations like yours, it's really crazy. If we didn't have these, you guys are a nonprofit, correct? Mm-hmm. If we didn't have groups like yours, who would be holding everybody accountable?
Well, we would have ranked choice voting right now, that's for sure.
Like where would, I know, but when you think about it, could it get any worse, right? Like I guess it can, I guess there's still room for.
Yeah, it could always get worse when groups don't stand up and say no or yes to certain ideas. But ranked choice would definitely confuse voters. Yeah. It's pretty much a well-agreed fact that during the first few elections, a lot of people feel like they're disenfranchised, voters do.
Sure.
Because they pick the wrong way to vote all the time. I think it's like 5 or 10% of voters will feel that way in the first few elections. It takes a while to educate voters what they're doing. I know the proponents will say, well, in Cambridge, they have something like this. But Cambridge isn't doesn't represent like how every town looks.
Sure.
And frankly, if you really feel so strongly about ranked choice voting, you can move to Cambridge and participate in those elections. But it shouldn't be pushed on the other, 350 towns in the state.
Yeah.
But it actually started in New England in 2016. Maine had a referendum on ranked choice. It passed in Maine. It's a small state in the grand scheme of things. So a lot of outside groups came in, put it on the ballot. It passed. The state Supreme Court in Maine ruled that it's not constitutional for state elections, but it is for federal elections. So they elect their senators and 2 members of Congress through ranked choice voting. And in 2000, and I think it was 20, a great example of how this stuff gets messed up is there was a Republican congressman in the northern seat of Maine named Bruce Paulquin. He was there for several terms, and I think he got 49.9% of the vote. He got the most first place votes. He was just shy of 50%. So it kicked into ranked choice, and what happened was the candidate with the second most votes ended up beating the candidate with the first most votes. So Jared Golden ended up winning over Bruce Paulquin, even though Bruce had the most first place votes. And why that happened is because there was 2 independent candidates running in that same election. One was a pro-marijuana candidate, so that was their one issue.
Yeah.
But the other independent candidate said, go vote for me, but if you don't, for your second ballot, you should vote for the Democrat, Jared Golden. Whatever you do, don't vote for the Republican because they're evil. So all of that person's votes then went to Jared Golden, and Jared Golden was able to win. So that's how you kind of game the system.
Well, because people are basically, just so the audience knows, so you select multiple candidates on this, right? So like choice means this is your first choice, this is your second choice, and this is your third choice.
Yeah.
But they also have an opportunity to not choose the other. Like if you have one choice and you want to stick with your one choice, they have the opportunity to do that and omit the other choices, right? But the majority of time, people may want to choose, well, I like this guy and I might like this guy, and then this is what could happen, right?
Yeah, this is a good point. So that's what happened in Maine.
Yeah.
The congressman ended up losing, and the second place kind of candidate with the candidate with the first.
Did he ever run again or no?
Bruce, he ended up running again, I think, and then he came up a little short. But that was one example of like how you can kind of abuse ranked choice to kind of get your outcome you want. But the proponents of ranked choice, their biggest argument, as I said, was they can pick a candidate with the most majority with a majority of votes, but they only do that by exhausting ballots, by discarding ballots that end up don't counting. And I'm against that. I actually think what Boston has is kind of a decent system. They have so ranked choice called independent runoffs. They just have runoff elections in Boston. And that's basically if you have more than 2 candidates, let's say like 10 candidates, for example, the candidates that come in 1 and 2 in the primary, basically nonpartisan primary, then advance to a general election. So that allows the voters to kind of look at that election again, and allows the candidates to kind of recalibrate their positions so that they can, get a majority vote against one other candidate. I like that system. Yeah. You have 2 elections. I think it's fair. It's clear. I don't buy this whole notion that, this saves taxpayer money to have 1 election on 1 day. I just don't think that's...
You wouldn't exist if the state prioritized saving taxpayer money. Let's just call it what it is.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you hear politicians who've never felt that inclination and suddenly they do, you have to ask yourself why.
Yeah.
But I think Boston actually has a decent system for this situation. The second thing that the pro-ranked choice people always say is, again, if you're ranking candidates, the assumption is that the candidates don't want to be negative against each other because they're also competing for second and third place votes. And if you think about that, you'd be like, that kind of makes some sense. But then you realize, well, what has been already happening with states that have ranked choice, like Maine? And it's well documented that in Maine, what ends up happening is just independent groups, super PACs, come out and do all the negative campaigning. So it doesn't eliminate negative campaigning at all. It just shifts that voice to super PACs, which is kind of what we have now for the most part. So the whole notion that ranked choice forces the candidates to compete for second, third place votes, therefore it takes away the negative campaign, is just not true. And the last thing that they always advocate for as a as their curb appeal to ranked choice is that it allows kind of fringe candidates to have a voice in the process. And again, I mentioned in Maine, they had this marijuana candidate. You can think of any type of fringe issue that isn't a majority kind of viewpoint. And maybe you want some kind of, you want that type of candidate to have a seat at the table so their issue can be heard. And they say it avoids the spoiler candidate. Because say if your issue is marijuana, I'm just throwing it out there because this is something that came up a few years ago. You kind of want to vote for the marijuana candidate, but you really want to vote for the Democrat Republican because usually those are the two candidates that matter. So you can throw your first vote to the marijuana candidate, the fringe candidate, and then do your second vote for the major party candidate. Well, again, look what happened in Maine. You had that play out. It doesn't take away that notion. You still have that issue going on. And frankly, if you throw a lot of these types of candidates in the race, then they become kind of like the kingmaker in these races.
Sure.
And do you really want fringe candidates to become kingmakers in elections where you usually have a Republican Democrat who will get the clear majority in most elections? Those are usually the consensus candidates. So I don't think that's a healthy thing for our democracy to have kind of fringe points of view dictating how the majority is going to select their candidates.
Yeah.
So those are the three major points that ranked choice people always go around and espouse. What was interesting is that passed in Maine in 2016. And then in 2019, these national groups started to come into Massachusetts and into Alaska. Those are the two states they threw on the ballot.
Now it's in Alaska, correct?
Yeah. So in 2020, it was on the ballot in Alaska and Massachusetts. And we fought against it really hard in Massachusetts. It won 55-45. Unfortunately, in Alaska, what they did in Alaska is they did something called ballot candy in Alaska.
Okay, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, so ballot candy is ranked choice voting plus something else that's really appealing. So think of anything you can think of that's really appealing, throw that as a ballot question, and throw in ranked choice voting as a kind of a side thing, as almost like a something that's attached to it. So in Alaska, they did ballot candy. So I think it was something that deals with campaign finance, like no foreign money in elections in Alaska.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, yeah, that makes sense. We want people in Alaska or in the United States to contribute to these candidates. No, we don't want Russia, China interfering with elections. So they voted for it, and they didn't know on election day, oh, by the way, did you see that small thing in the back of this ballot?
That's crazy.
So that's called ballot candy.
That's crazy.
So it passed, and I remember talking to folks in Alaska leading up to it, and they're saying no one knows this is on the ballot.
Until they go to vote.
Yeah, until the day after.
Yeah.
Right, but they don't get this, how we get the red book?
Yeah.
They didn't have something.
I don't know if they have the red book, but the problem is that in Massachusetts with ballot questions, everything has to be kind of, they call it, I think, mutually dependent on each other. Huh. So in other states, you don't have that. And that's how you can do these ballot candy things. So you just find an issue that everyone in the world is going to support, and then you throw a really controversial policy on it.
Sounds like what Congress does with passing bills.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, a lot of times you see that with like budgets,
right?
And amendments. That happens in Massachusetts with budget amendments. You see these amendments that have hundreds of policies attached. But in Massachusetts, say for ballot questions, they have a very strict interpretation of what's allowed to go forward because they don't want to confuse voters in Massachusetts. It's actually a really good thing. They don't want to confuse voters. But in other states, they don't have that. And that's what happened in Alaska. So it narrowly passed in Alaska. We defeated it. And then last cycle, for the 2024 cycle, the ranked choice people went into about 5 or 6 other states.
So they just said, we have too much opposition in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
We got to go. What's in it for them? Like, realistically, like, there's always this component, in my opinion, of like, when you're ever trying to push something, like, what is in it for them?
They wanted about 10% of elections in the United States decided by ranked choice voting. So that's why they went into 5 or 6 states, hoping that they can pass in these states. And now they can say 10% of elections.
Is somebody funding these groups?
Yeah,
Who?
national organizations. There's a handful of them that are doing it. In Massachusetts, in the 2020 election, there was 3 people that funded, I think, like 80% of the entire ballot question.
Really?
Yeah. One of them was I think Soros' son. The other one was Rupert Murdoch's daughter-in-law, I believe.
Yes.
And then the third one was this guy from Texas, I think, named Reynolds.
Okay.
So I had some stories written about this. I was flagging this, saying,
yes,
why are these 3 or 4 people funding a ballot question to decide how we elect our leaders in the state? And they're not from Massachusetts. I mean, obviously they had some Massachusetts donors, but it was a clear.
But the majority.
If it went to a runoff election, an instant runoff election, it wasn't necessary, but it was a clear majority of who was funding their election.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's some national folks who have very deep pockets. And they are trying to change the way we elect our leaders.
Is this going to happen? Will this be something that we see happen again here?
I think so.
Yeah.
Because they tried again. They tried to do it in Massachusetts for the 2024 election cycle. They tried to resurrect it. And part of the reason is because they were so ticked off.
Of course.
And how they lost to us, this ragtag group with $7,500 versus their $10 million. And I know that they were upset because they wrote op-eds saying, don't
Sure.
listen to Mass Fiscal lines when it comes to ballot questions. They just lie, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
blah.
of course.
Well, 55% of the state listened to us, and they agreed with us. But yeah, last election cycle, they tried to put 3 ballot questions that had ranked choice plus something else. They tried doing the ballot candy routine like they did in Alaska. So I think one of them was no foreign money in elections plus ranked choice voting. The other one was expand voting rights in Massachusetts plus ranked choice voting. And the third one was this unique advancing of top five candidates, make it nonpartisan elections plus ranked choice voting. And it's like in California, they have something called jungle primaries, which is take away the party affiliation, the top 2 people go forward. So it could be 2 Democrats or 2 Republicans. In this case, it's take away partisan primaries, and the top 5 candidates can go forward. And if there's a Republican or Democrat, they could be endorsed by the party, but you're taking away the primaries itself. And if there wasn't a majority, then it would go to ranked choice. So they had 3 different ranked choice plus some other ballot candy idea. And we saw it, and we opposed it before the Massachusetts Attorney General's office when they filed the paperwork. And we said, you know, that thing I was talking about earlier about how things have to be dependent on each other. We said these issues are not dependent on each other. You can't say foreign money elections is dependent on ranked choice voting and vice versa. So we went through all 3, and we said, for these reasons, this should be excluded. Because you could say a voter in Massachusetts doesn't think foreign money elections should be allowed, but also doesn't want ranked choice voting. They're not built on each other.
Right. They're not. Yes, I understand.
Yeah. So it's like you put a roof on a house, you need the roof for the house.
Right.
In this case, you don't need to ban foreign money in elections and have ranked choice voting. You could do them separately easily. And the other thing we also said is that there was a ballot question on this in 2020, and they were trying to put it on the ballot for 2024, and there has to be like a cooling off period of 6 years.
Yes.
So they were violating that as well. So for those 2 main reasons, the AG, who is a Democrat, who is publicly, again, part of that celebrity Democrat majority in the state house who endorsed ranked choice voting publicly, she endorsed it, and she actually agreed with us. So she knocked him out of the ballot, and the voters were spared from having to decide on 3 ballot questions that had ranked choice voting this past November. Because that could have really happened. You could have had 3 ballot questions saying, do you want ranked choice voting plus something else? Do you want ranked choice voting plus something else? And the third time, do you want ranked choice voting plus something else?
I thought when you mentioned that, I thought you meant there were 3 different drafts, and then somebody was going to pick the best one to end up. I didn't know you meant.
Yeah, they had 3 different
actual ones.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now they could have withdrawn.
That's excessive.
Yeah, they could have withdrawn 2 and picked the one that polled the highest, if you will. But technically, they were 3 different questions with ranked choice in it.
All right.
Who initiated this? Who tried to get this to go through again?
So I know who initiated it because she reached out to me.
Who?
So do you remember when Maura Healey ran for governor?
Yeah.
She did have a Democrat primary. A Harvard law professor named Danielle Allen ran against her. Well, Professor Allen, Harvard law professor, reached out to me. And she was the one that was, I believe her and her different groups were trying to push it again in Massachusetts. And I really wouldn't be surprised if the next election cycle they try to do the same thing. And we'll try to oppose it for the 3rd time again.
Yeah, because she was... She wanted this to go through back originally, right? She supported this.
Yeah.
It's funny because, as I said earlier, when you think about it, this is just something, in my opinion, that would invite more opportunity to circumvent or to, kind of muddy up the voting process, right? Because you're essentially confusing voters into voting. They don't know what the hell they're voting for, right? Like, I mean, just to explain it to some people, it's confusing to just explain.
Yeah, and you're putting a burden on them to go study all the candidates for every election and have to pick.
Yeah.
I mean, the funny part is 2020, when this was a ballot question, we had a pretty high-profile election that year.
Yeah.
Congressman Kennedy left to go run for the U.S. Senate. And he opened a congressional seat, which for a lot of Democrats in Massachusetts, that's like, oh my gosh, a huge stepping stone.
Yeah.
So in his open congressional seat for the Democrat primary in September, there were like a dozen candidates running. Most of them were pretty credible. So that's happening in September. At the same time, the ballot questions in November. So we were doing debates all around the states and forums and editorial board meetings.
Yeah.
And this was also one of the big topics was, the open congressional seat with all these Democrats running. After that primary, while I'm still doing these debates, forums, and editorial meetings, I would say to the groups, do you guys remember who just was running in that Democrat primary like 2 weeks ago? Can you name all those candidates?
Yeah.
Can you rank them now? And like everyone just looks at me blank, they all forgot.
Yes.
And that's the whole point. Like, don't make it overly complicated. And that was just one example. And that was a high profile race. Imagine doing that for Board of Selectmen, City Council, Mayor, State Rep, State Senator, Congress, Senator. That's a lot.
That is.
Yeah.
How has this been? Let me ask you this, because you were so successful and your group was so successful at shutting this down twice.
Mm-hmm.
Have other states reached out to you in regards to this for advice, opinions, so on and so forth?
They certainly did. Massachusetts was the first state to reject it.
Yeah.
There's been other towns and cities who have actually repealed ranked choice voting. Believe it or not, in California, run a blue state run by Democrats. Governor Jerry Brown and Governor Galvin Newsom dealt with this when they were mayors, and they had ranked choice. They actually passed it into law in their jurisdictions, and then they repealed it.
Why did they repeal it? Do you know why?
Same reasons we're talking today.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, they said basically the appeal of ranked choice didn't come to fruition.
Yeah.
The things they advertised never really materialized. So other towns and cities have repealed it. Even the city of Worcester, second largest city, had ranked choice or some kind of form of it, and it repealed it a long time ago.
Yeah.
But Massachusetts was the first state to say no. And then, as I mentioned, in 2024, there was about 5 or 6 other states that also were considering it. And there were a few other states that were trying to push it through the legislature. Mm-hmm. And a lot of those states reached out to us just saying, hey, how did you guys do it in Massachusetts? So we were trying to help them out as much as possible.
Did the second time around, was that also backed by the same group of people that were?
I don't know because I wasn't part of their team.
Yeah.
My guess is there was probably a lot of crossover too.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, I also think that some people definitely were licking their wounds en masse.
Yeah.
To lose that badly to a ragtag group of just volunteers.
Yeah.
So they may have wanted to go in other states too, some of the national groups. But, if you look at the map, a lot of stuff is experimented in California, Illinois, New York, and Massachusetts, Vermont. And that's kind of where these things kind of start sometimes.
Now, New York City has this in the city, don't they?
I believe they do.
I think they do. That's what I was reading.
Yeah.
It all starts, the more you put the pieces of the puzzle together, you kind of see, it starts to come together, right? It's like, it's really wild what happens here.
Yeah.
And it's just, again, I think it just invites opportunities for either people not voting because they're confused. Mm-hmm. And of course, we would have to get some data on this, right? Like, maybe based off of Alaska, or it's still in Maine too, correct? Yeah. And see how that data translates throughout time. But overall, I think that people will just be summoned in general.
Yeah, Massachusetts really dodged a bullet by.
Yeah, they did. But this is an issue
position.
that could pop up again.
Yeah,
and then you're going to be summoned.
I know,
right?
I know, and gladly so, because I think that will really disenfranchise a lot of people in Massachusetts.
I think so.
Yeah.
If you don't mind me asking, what's your opinion on the voter ID thing? Do you want to talk about that or no?
Voter ID?
Yeah.
It's a great idea. It should be done. The only thing with Massachusetts is the driver's license doesn't mean anything anymore.
Yeah.
That's a problem. I mean, when Governor Baker vetoed the law that was passed in the legislature, which is giving driver's license to undocumented people, so migrants, illegal immigrants, he warned in that veto letter. He said, basically, the driver's license won't mean anything. We can't guarantee the person's identity. And you're basically asking the Department of Homeland Security responsibilities to fall on the Massachusetts DMV.
Yeah.
That's a very hard thing. And then on top of that, when that law was passed, there were amendments filed during that debate that would say let the town clerks, city clerks coordinate with the DMV. Mm-hmm. When you get a voter registration form in your town, based on someone's license, let them coordinate with the DMV to make sure that person is a U.S. citizen, and that was rejected.
Yeah.
So now imagine that burden on your town hall, on your town clerk. It's a lot of work to ensure that's the right documentation. So I'm in support of voter ID.
Yes.
The only hiccup in all that is the Massachusetts driver's license doesn't guarantee someone's identity.
Yeah.
There's, it's not.
So they could circumvent that? Is that what you're basically trying to say?
I'm saying the license doesn't guarantee that is who you are anymore.
Oh, I see what you mean.
The warning that Governor Baker made about the law is valid. Now we have Real ID, which is a federal standard, and that's much more kind of documented to ensure someone's identity.
Yeah.
So if you're showing a Real ID, it's different than a Massachusetts driver's license. A Real ID is based off of federal laws and rules for showing. I don't know if you guys have it, but I went through it a few years ago. You have to show a lot of paperwork.
I think I did. I'd have to look at my driver's license, but I think I did.
Now, if you're showing a federal Real ID, which is a driver's license that went through Real ID, then you're definitely who you are.
That's almost, can you use that as you still have to get passports, don't you? Or
no? I think so.
You can't use that as a passport too, right?
What, the Real
ID stuff?
I think you can.
I thought that's what they were trying to. Isn't that what they're trying to do or something like that? Yeah,
they're trying to make it so that you have to use a Real ID.
Yeah. That's what I thought. But ultimately, obviously, I fully support people having to have some sort of identification to vote.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it just invites too much. It's just becomes something where it may not be accurate, right? Mm-hmm. And I actually did a video when we have somebody coming on. That Jeff Cohen, right? Was that his name? I think it was.
Yes.
And
a month from now.
Do you know him by chance?
No. That sounds familiar.
They have a whole bunch of like data analysts and so on and so forth, and they went to every town in Massachusetts, which I think there's around 330 like municipalities, cities, so on and so forth. And in their reporting, there was like over 750 errors in terms of like there was like duplicates, like people, you go to vote, they're not even asking who you are or where you're from or where you came from. It's really crazy. And the fact of the matter is it's a privilege to be able to vote, right? Mm-hmm. People should be residents of the towns. They should be residents of these municipalities. And I feel like this is, I could understand to a point why somebody won't, like if your grandmother or somebody, like somebody can't get, like the other thing is paper ballots, right? Mm-hmm. If they can't get there or so on and so forth. But I think the integrity of elections depends on it, right?
Yeah. I think whenever you talk about elections and voter laws, and there's a lot of kind of things bubbling around like same-day voter registration, voting early, vote by mail.
Yeah.
Satellite voting is another one. So whenever you're talking about these kind of voter access laws or voter ID, you should always want transparency.
Sure.
And I think that's the key. If you want to allow more voter access, you should also be demanding more transparency. So if you want to do same-day voter registration or mail-in voting or any of these types of ideas that kind of the left is always pushing, well, the other side to that is that it should be available to the public. Everyone should be able to see this data.
Yes.
This should be on a website. It should be updated in real time. You should be able to know who's requesting absentee ballots and know who has sent it in. You should be able to know who has voted early and who hasn't. With full transparency in the process, it helps kind of alleviate any concerns for mischief.
Yeah.
And allows a lot more kind of eyeballs looking at it and saying, well, there's some problems here. We're seeing some issue. We're seeing, two Paul Craneys registered to vote in one household, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You just, you take away some of the human error that's intentional or not intentional. That definitely happens. So I would say anytime you hear kind of these voter laws being put out there, we should be always demanding full transparency. And Massachusetts really is not that good on this issue.
No, when it comes to the two key words I always say in my video, transparency and accountability, we lack that a lot.
Yeah, the transparency in Massachusetts, if you want to know, who has voted early or who's registered to vote, all these things that I think is really important, you have to go to all the town cities and all the town halls to get this data. You should be able to just get it from the Secretary of State's website. It should be just on the website. That's what other states do actually on this stuff. I've worked in other states where they have these laws, and the Secretary of State in those states will put this data on the website, update it multiple times a day, so everyone can see it, and you feel much more confident in the system.
Yeah. We only hold that stuff for like 2 years though or something, right? Like
I don't know how many years, but they only hold it for a while.
Yeah, it's only like a couple of years.
Yeah,
and if you don't have it, it's done.
And I'll say Mass Fiscal, so we follow voting pretty closely. And in the past, it's a very expensive program, but there'll be an election, and what we'll do is we'll take the data of who just voted right after an election, and then we'll go mail them. We'll send them a letter.
Yeah.
And then we'll see through the postal office who received the letter and what got bounced back to us. And anytime you send a letter with a stamp on it, you're actually paying for the Postal Service to return your piece too and tell you what happened. So it'll tell you there's no mailbox. The person was deceased. The person has moved out 12 months ago. So you'll get a code. And if I remember right, it was like 2 to 3% after these elections, you're getting that. And sometimes up to 5%.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's fraud. I'm just saying the
Yeah.
data isn't accurate.
Well, what is it? Do you know off the top of your head? Not that I want you to bring up anything, but statistically throughout the country, what does that look like? Like if it's 5% for Massachusetts, what is it across the country?
I'm not sure what it is around the country.
Okay, I'll have to look it up. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't happen at all, right?
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, it shouldn't happen one time.
If you put this data on a website, then everyone in the state could tinker with it. Then we can all be looking at, we can all be, checking it to see if it's accurate or not.
Yeah.
So that's, I think with voter laws, it should always be accompanied with transparency for the public.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
100%. You want to talk a little bit about the budget, Massachusetts budget?
Yes, gladly. Yeah. And it's kind of a topic that we've been following for a long time. We've been seeing the writing on the wall with what's happening in Massachusetts. Just to take a step back, during the pandemic, there was a lot of federal money flowing into Massachusetts and a lot of these states. Mm-hmm. And then you had the millionaire's tax that went into effect in January 1st of 2023, and all of a sudden the state got about 1.5–2 billion extra dollars. Mm-hmm. So you have pandemic federal money, and you got this interesting tax collecting a lot more money. And what happened during that time period? The budget skyrocketed. I think it doubled in 7 years. The problem is, and that we've been just talking about this for years, is these politicians continue to build new programs off of this one-time money, federal stimulus money. And with the millionaire's tax, they're building new programs off of what I would say kind of volatile source of income.
Yes.
We're the only state in the nation that still has free lunch meals for kids in schools. Mm-hmm. That was a pandemic era benefit in a lot of states, and we kept it. We have free community college now. That's a new program that just happened a few years ago. The MBTA has really focused on spend, not so much on efficiency and how they spend their own money. Mm-hmm. That's our priority now, spend and hire people. So we have these programs that are just bloating, or they're becoming new programs. So that's why you see the state having a budget that has increased 50% in 7 years. So Governor Maura Healey, her problem now is she's struggling to find where she can find money, because she just raised the millionaire's tax. They've raised other tax since then too. They've actually raised more taxes since. But she's trying to push for all these kind of new taxes and fees, assessments. In her budget, she requested a $2 tax on prescription drugs.
Yes.
She wants to triple the local vehicle excise tax that everyone gets in Massachusetts once a year if you have a vehicle. She wants to triple it.
Which is crazy, because if you have a new vehicle, it's a lot of money, the excise tax. Like it's like $500. It could be $500. So imagine triple that.
Yeah, imagine triple that every year. It's a lot of money. It adds up quick. They also want to increase hotel tax, takeout food tax.
What about meal tax?
Yeah, that's takeout food tax.
That is part of that? Okay.
Yep. She proposed a tax on candy.
Yes, I saw that.
Which is really just kind of cold when she was doing it right on Valentine's Day. There's a lot of taxes, fees, assessments in her budget. We've found some other things we're still looking at too. But the good news is there's been a lot of pressure on her with these taxes. And the Speaker and the Senate President, who love taxes themselves, actually came out saying they don't support the prescription drug tax. And we think the candy tax might be dead too. Mm-hmm. But the ones to also watch is that vehicle excise tax. That's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah. For a lot of people, that's going to cut into their cost of living. Yeah. Because, that's a tax after tax, right? You already bought your car. You paid the sales tax. And now you're just paying another tax once a year.
Yeah, and our roads. I don't know what that
tax.
Yeah,
that's what
wealth tax. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's a tax on a tax, basically.
Yeah. But meanwhile, I don't know what the money's supposed to go towards. God only knows. But meanwhile, you drive down some of these roads, and you're lucky you don't blow something off of your car.
I know.
It's crazy. With all this tax, you figure we would have the nicest roads in the country, right?
Well, the millionaire's tax was supposed to fix transportation. That was one of the big things. It. Yeah, instead I just went to the MBTA.
Yeah, that tax though, the millionaire you said that went up again?
So, well, they did something to it.
Oh, okay.
So
They altered it a little bit?
They made it, you don't have to be a millionaire to get taxed on the
Wait,
millionaire's
what?
tax. Yeah.
When did this change? I wasn't
They
aware.
put that rider in, the tax cut that
Okay.
Maura Healey proposed in 2023. So in 2023, after the millionaire's tax went into effect, there was a huge outcry because, wealth moves.
Sure.
So people were domiciling pretty quickly. Even Healey heard the pushback. I mean, that's why she was proposing a tax cut. So she proposed very modest tax cuts, which I celebrate tax cuts any day of the week, even if they're modest. But it's not. It shouldn't be the end. But in that tax cut bill, she actually increased taxes. And what they did is in Massachusetts, we had a law that wouldn't penalize people who are married who filed jointly.
Mm-hmm.
And what they did is made it so you're penalized. So it's a marriage penalty. So with your combined income now, instead of your individual income, but now you're combined of $1 million. So two people who are married, now if your combined income is $1 million, you get whacked. If you're single, you don't get whacked
Yeah.
with this tax. But because now you're combined,
Yeah.
it's a marriage penalty. It's a very bad thing to have in your tax code, penalizing people to be married.
Yeah.
And a lot of states really try to go out of their way to avoid it. And what they'll do is they'll do rebates. They'll do other things so that if the law is on the book, they'll find a way so that you're not penalized just because you're married. You have a combined income. In Massachusetts, we had that provision to protect married couples. They got rid of it. So now when you're filing your taxes and you have a combined income, so one may be earning less than $1 million, but when you put it together,
Yeah.
now you're getting whacked.
Do you think, just to expand on this a little bit, I know we don't have the data to support what I'm going to say, but in the future, do you think that you're going to see more people that, make a lot of money, make over $1 million in the state, leave?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's inevitable, right?
Especially if you're, I'm not like trying to do poor me for the really rich people out there.
Yeah, I know.
But you always want to be a state that's trying to be really competitive.
Sure.
And if you look at the states around the country, like the top 5, they are very aggressive with trying to attract talent, wealth, and growing businesses.
Yeah.
And it's not with giving away subsidies or tax credits. Maybe do some of that, but really it's by making a tax code that just allows these businesses and these people of wealth to grow there. So we should always be, as a state, trying to say, how can we get the best and the brightest to come here, grow here, or stay here? And what's going to happen is if you start hitting that category, if you start getting hit with this tax in a way that's punitive every year after year, you're going to leave. Of
course.
It's just a business
It's
decision.
only a matter of time to be able to track that, look at the data, and say this was a bad idea.
Yeah.
Right. I
Yeah.
mean, it's you're right though. So she's imposing, like, that's just one avenue. You got the pharmaceutical tax. You got the candy tax. I mean, how much further could she possibly go?
Taxing kids with their candy. I mean, what else is there? Putting a tax on a tax on your vehicle excise tax. I mean, what else do you want?
It's great. I have a one-off question for you too. Speaking of taxes, so I don't know if you know this. You probably do, but a lot of towns, I'm like auditing my audience, and I ask them to report if their town is behind on budget. There's a lot of towns that are behind on their budget.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is they're looking for overrides. And like, I understand these towns themselves or the municipalities need to be like financially responsible with their money. But I see this trend, like what I'm doing right now is like I'm tracking this trend to see if there's a correlation, because what's happening is a lot of these towns are blaming it on inflation. And I know inflation is part of that because Massachusetts has a rule, what is it, 2.5%? They can't charge more than 2.5% in your real estate taxes per
the levy.
year. Yes, exactly. But the fact is I don't solely think that it's only due to inflation.
Yeah.
I know that's a good component of it, right? Do you guys ever look at specific towns, or is it more on a state level?
Mostly on a state level. Sometimes towns will pop up for sure. And we're hearing about that a lot.
Because these towns need help, right?
Yeah. And if you look at the state, again, what's their priority? I mentioned that the state budget has increased 50% in 7 years.
Yeah.
Is that money going back to local aid? No.
No.
It's going to new programs. So the state is collecting more from the taxpayers. It's creating more programs instead of saying, let's give it back to the local towns. Let's give it back in the form of property tax relief. So their priority is to spend and grab more money. And what's happening is the local aid is getting cut off. A lot of these towns and cities are getting more mandates that they have to fund. And it's unfortunate to see, but I'm very thankful we have Prop 2.5.
Yeah.
This was a ballot question proposed in 1978, passed in 1980 during a time period before my time, but it was a high inflation time period. The
Yes.
70s, there was a lot of volatility in the market. People saw their earning power diminish, and Prop 2.5 was an answer to those times. It was saying to rein in, actually Prop 2.5 did a lot of things, but one of the things that we remember today is to rein in the levy at 2.5%. It forces these municipalities to come back to the voters and make a strong case for why they need to increase the taxes more than 2.5. But actually Prop 2.5 did more than just that. Before Prop 2.5, if you lived in a town, now get ready for this. If you lived in a town or city before Prop 2.5, did you know your property taxes could be taxed twice?
That's crazy.
By the Board of Selectmen, but then by the school committee had its own ability to raise your property taxes. And Prop 2.5 said, no, school committee shouldn't be raising property taxes. That's just a Board of Selectmen matter. So imagine what, if we didn't have Prop 2.5, thank God for Barbara Anderson, Chip Ford, Chip Faulkner for pushing this, we would have not just your selectmen, but the school committee threatening property tax hikes.
Yeah.
That would have been tough.
Your taxes right now, if you didn't have it, if you were to calculate it, they'd probably be like $40,000 a year. It would be crazy.
It is.
So I'm not disagreeing with it at all. Like the 2.5, I'm not disagreeing with it. But on one hand, but on the other hand, if you have a lot of towns, I mean, even if it's less than a third, let's say a quarter of the towns that are behind on budget, you know, they're just going back and you know, they're looking for these overrides and stuff. And the problem, that's not my problem, okay? My problem is that if there's a trend of multiple towns, and this is what I've been tracking, if there's a trend of multiple towns that are behind on budget for one thing or another, why is the state, as you said, creating all of these programs, bloating their budget, and not, I mean, they could provide grants or something to these towns to pay back so they could, like, figure out where the bloat is within their own budget. Like, don't you think that's what the state should be doing versus creating new programs? Take care of the people that took care of the state, right?
Yeah, no, I complete agreement. I mean, it's a priority issue. What's their priority? Their priority is not local aid. Their priority is not giving money back to the taxpayers or helping the ratepayers. It's always a new program. Do you think these programs are to bring more talent to the state? Like, are they looking like way beyond something that, like, sometimes I sit there and I'm thinking to myself, am I only seeing what's in front of me and they're like playing 3D chess somewhere and I'm playing checkers? I think a lot of times what's driving what's happening in the State House, the special interest is trying to push some kind of narrative. Yeah. Honestly, what was interesting with the millionaire's tax debate in 2022, and it went into effect in 2023, is, like I said, there's like 5 states or so that are really competitive.
Yeah.
And most people know what they are. You know, it's Texas, Florida, New Hampshire, Tennessee's there, North Carolina. These are states you always hear about. It's amazing. Our friends up north in New Hampshire, they have no sales tax. They have no death tax. They have no income tax. However, when this law passed, the Massachusetts millionaire tax, they had a small tax on incomes for interest and dividends, which, you know, that is a form of income. And they had an income tax still left on it, and it was scheduled to expire. When Massachusetts passed the millionaire tax, they accelerated their phase out of their income tax on interest and dividends, not to compete with Massachusetts. They knew they had Massachusetts. Massachusetts is not competing with New Hampshire. People go there, obviously. They were trying to compete with Florida based off of what happened in Massachusetts with the millionaire's tax. They didn't want people to go to Florida. But that's a 3D chess that's happening in this country, is the top kind of most competitive states are competing with themselves against the middle of the states, and they're not competing with the bottom states like California, New York, and Massachusetts. It's done. We're cooked already. Yeah. So I don't think Spilka, Mariano, and Healy are trying to do some 3D chess. I think they can't even get themselves out of their own way right now. Yes. You go to a state like New Hampshire, who's trying to compete with Florida for people outward migrating from Massachusetts. That's 3D chess. Yeah. So the most competitive states are just feasting on Massachusetts. The word is out, Massachusetts in trouble. It'll be interesting what happens down the road when the millionaire's tax revenue starts to really decline. Yeah. Because it just takes time for people to domicile out. Yeah. That tax will always impact like one-time millionaires. Yes. You know, people who sell a home, people who sell a business. Unfortunately, it's the nest egg that's going to get hit with people. But for people who are growing companies, people who are highly productive in society, those people it's a business decision.
Yeah.
They may love Massachusetts. They may still live here with a vacation home, but they're not paying taxes here anymore.
Yeah.
And we're going to lose that money. That money will diminish over time. Unfortunately, our leaders in the State House are building big state programs off of the back of that tax. And when that money expires, when it starts to get diminished, we all have to watch out because they're not going to cut that budget. They're going to come after the rest of us.
The budget is what, about 60 billion right
I think it's
now?
like 65.
65 billion? That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
It's a lot.
Even like you hear these stories all the time, right? Even like Boston last year, it came out that I think like 7 Boston employees, I'm saying.
Yeah.
Not Massachusetts, Boston, earned over $500,000 in their salary.
Yeah.
Like what is happening?
It's really crazy when you think about it. And the only thing that I could come up with is like people will take care of their own. I mean, I don't know if it's anything beyond that, but it's really wild when you start, like I like comparing data from other states like New Hampshire and so on and so forth to get an idea. Like if something's working in state A, could that potentially work in state B? But it always seems like here in Massachusetts, like they're progressive to a fault, but it's like ready, fire, aim almost, right?
Totally.
Like everything is based off
There's no self-reflection of
yes,
like,
there's no self-reflection. Everything is based off of an emotional decision, and it's not necessarily like a data-backed decision, right? Or some thought that goes into it.
Or they want to change the data to look at.
Oh, yeah, exactly. That's another thing.
Yeah, I mean, with the millionaire's tax, you heard them kind of take a beating on it, and then they wanted to change the narrative to be like, oh, we need to train our workforce.
Yeah.
And it's like, but how about all the people leaving? How about all the businesses leaving?
So it's going to be an interesting metric because I often look at the metrics of migration patterns. And normally what we see is people will move to Rhode Island. They'll move down to Florida. They'll move up to New Hampshire. I want to see, and I don't know if this has been published yet for 2024. I can't remember off the top of my head. But I'm also not sure if they publish it based on earnings. Like, so how many people moved out of the state that were millionaire earners?
Yeah.
Because you're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul here because, you're taxing them more on that $1 million plus income. But if they leave the state, there's no income.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there's no net positive. There's no gain.
There's no jobs if they're a job maker.
Don't they think about these things, or is it just like people like us that are thinking this through?
They don't want to confront the problems. It's harder to confront the problems and deal with it than it is to stick your head in the sand and say, this is a problem for down the road.
I always say this. I think I even said it today. I feel like Massachusetts, as progressive as they are, they're more reactive than proactive. Like they'll do something and then they'll have to backtrack on it. Like what Mara did with, the natural gas and electricity and so on and so forth, right? Like she's trying to cover herself with that.
Or look at the migrant situation. For 3 years we're festering, still no background checks. There's no one looking at how much we're spending at these meals in these hotels.
Exactly.
It's really bad.
It's really bad. And I feel like a lot of people are out there, and that's why I'm thankful that you came on today. I feel like a lot of people have the blinders on, but what happens is over time, people will become emotionally attached to something, to see these pictures online or this narrative that they're trying to spin, but that becomes exhausted too. And I think a lot of people here in the state have become exhausted with that. And I think that's why you see people like Michelle Wu, you see Mara Healy, Ed Markey, Elizabeth Warren, like these people that have been here forever. A lot of people I feel like are becoming a little bit more conservative, and they're getting to a point where they're starting to realize like this doesn't add up.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
But I will tell you, it is easier to ignore all that stuff.
Yeah.
Once you're in the thick of it, like we are in here, once you see it, it's like you could no longer ignore it. So I could actually understand why they don't want to, dive into these issues, right, to a point. But on the other hand, they're doing themselves a potential disservice because, the people are in control, like whether people know it or not, they have a voice too. And that's why you guys are doing what you're doing. That's why we're trying to do what we're doing and provide that voice for people, you know?
No, definitely. People
and advocate for them.
The voters are the ones that are in control. Absolutely. Yeah. Ultimately, all these politicians are accountable to the voters. So, a lot of times people ask me, like, why do you do what you do? Don't you feel like it's exhausting? And every once in a while, moments happen where you see voters are tuning in and your issue they've been fighting for a long time is validated.
Yeah.
We're seeing this right now with the energy issue. I mean, for years and years, we were saying, Massachusetts, if you continue to tie yourself to these green climate mandates, these alternate energy mandates, you're going to have to pay. It's going to be very expensive. And now people this winter are finally waking up to what's happening, which is you're paying for the transition of these mandates that are not goals, they're mandates, and they're just starting to get kicked in. It's going to get a lot worse. Same thing with the millionaire's tax. You're going to see more and more data that people are domiciling and leaving. And it's funny, even today, I still get people that I talk to, like, not trying to beat up media or anything, but I still talk to people who should know this stuff. And they'll say, what's domicile? And I'm just like, oh my gosh, we're still here?
Yeah.
And I would probably bet some of these legislators don't know what domicile means.
Yeah.
Because they think they're not going to move. I hear that. They're not going to move. I'm going to say, you're right. They're not going to move. They will keep their home here, but they won't pay taxes.
Yep.
And they're like, they don't understand what I'm talking about. Like, no, that's domicile.
Yes.
They're paying taxes in Florida or New Hampshire, but they're going to visit here on their vacation home.
100%.
And you lost all their income. You lost all their charitable contributions. You're just keeping their property taxes, which for a state, they don't get the property taxes. So I think over the next few years, you're going to really see this get confronted. And I do think, not to be too political, but the next governor's race, it should be pretty telling. I think a lot of voters are starting to wake up to some of these failed policies.
Yes.
I'm not saying Maura Healey's going to lose or win. I'm just saying I think people are starting to, in Massachusetts, have a good understanding of the difference between what happens in Washington and what happens at the State House. And hopefully, they'll have an opportunity to hold these politicians accountable.
Yeah, I mean, we had the auditor on last time, and she's trying to do. And you were in support of her audit, correct?
Oh yeah, we were helping a lot.
Yeah, you helped a lot with that, and she was in here for an hour talking about it, and it's really unfortunate because it's circumstances like that where people feel like they lose their voice. They vote for something and then it doesn't happen.
Totally.
And I think in regards to Maura Healey, I think she's going to be if somebody steps up to the plate, and I think there's a lot of things that they could bring up in terms of policy and so on and so forth. And right before we got here, right before you showed up, I had somebody calling me, and and I get these calls a lot where they're deciding whether they're going to pay for food this month or pay their electricity bill.
Yeah, it's
right?
so sad.
And this is not a one-off person. This is happening in real time. And I think and maybe you know more about this than I do. I think that the goals of being let's say more reliant on renewables is a good idea, but I don't think that the technology and so on and so forth has caught up to make it where you could become whole. Like the cost is too expensive for people, right?
Yeah.
It's too expensive to get to that point because technology hasn't caught up with that. Plus, we're in New England here, right? Let's face it, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about solar or wind or whatever. It's just, you got to try something. I understand that, and you want to, try to shift and pivot to make renewables better. But I just don't think that right now is the time. And what's happening is we're the ones paying for it. We're all paying for it.
Yeah, the biggest problem in Massachusetts is we have a mandate. It's not a goal. You're talking about a goal. In Massachusetts in 2021, they passed a mandate. They took the goal and made it into a mandate. And now all these bad decisions that are happening, the focus is not on the ratepayer, how much it costs, or doesn't make practical sense, but it's fulfill a mandate.
Yeah.
And we are just getting started, because by 2050 we have to be net zero. And what happened essentially is the legislature gave their authority to the executive branch, the governor's office. So now her administrators, her bureaucrats are executing the mandate.
Yeah.
And the ratepayers are the ones that are forced to pay for it. So this is our future in Massachusetts. We did a study through our foundation, which you have a copy right there.
I'm going to link that in the description.
Yeah, and it shows for the average New England ratepayer, our bills will go up $100 every year. Average individual ratepayer, not a business or industry, those go up a lot more to hit these net zero mandates. By 2050, every ratepayer will be in about $51,000 in debt to this transition.
That's per year, per household.
It's going to be $815 billion for this transition. You have to produce 3 or 4 times the amount of energy we currently produce for weather-dependent, renewable, alternate energy to replicate what we have, which is high-density, baseload energy in the form of natural gas and nuclear. So I actually don't believe in all of the above approach for energy anymore. I thought that was pretty popular a few years ago.
Yeah.
But we've now experimented and it doesn't work. All above doesn't work. Offshore wind is heavily subsidized. I mean, taxpayers, ratepayers pay for it. At the same time, you're penalizing our current energy to drive up costs so it can compete with a subsidized form of renewable energy. So I don't think it works. When you take out all the subsidies, they don't all stand equal. We have, currently New England has energy. It has baseload energy. And what these politicians try to do is just incorporate alternate forms of energy. which is solar, wind, and battery storage. So I would say if we want cheap energy, continue to do what we're doing, which is import natural gas from Pennsylvania, expand that, and expand nuclear.
Yeah.
Those are high density, high tech, mostly very clean forms of cheap energy. It's kind of funny if you think about, like, take a step back and think about offshore wind. This is a technology we phased out a long time ago, windmills, for things that are pretty high tech, like nuclear. Mm-hmm. And now we're going back to the low tech energy source.
Yeah.
Like, what is that? When do we do that in society? When do we go from riding horses to adopting combustion engines to going back to riding horses?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, why are we taking these steps back?
Yeah.
Because these are weather dependent, low density, very expensive, unreliable alternate forms of energy.
Yeah.
So I don't believe in all the above anymore.
Yeah. No, I don't. Listen, I don't disagree with you there. And we had an engineer on, and he was talking about the cost of, these wind farms and so on and so forth. Most of this stuff is manufactured out of the country.
Yeah.
Right. And then what happens is if something breaks or, if technology advances, you don't even know if you could get the parts to repair it, right? So you have the cost of repair, you have the cost of installation, you have your material cost,
and
your labor,
replacement costs,
and then by the time it's time to replace it, you may have to replace the entire thing, and then they don't know where to store the
I know.
They don't know where to store the.
Well, we saw when the blade broke in July, they didn't have a plan. There was no plan for what happens when a blade breaks.
Yeah,
it was let's not tell the Nantucket, wait till the stuff gets found, and I don't know, get guys on the beach with bags. Maybe that will work. Yeah, right? That's all they did.
There's no plan. I feel like there's absolutely no plan.
We have friends in Nantucket and the vineyard, and they still find this stuff on the beach today.
Really?
Yeah, as of today. Like, they're still finding this little particles in the beach. It takes a long time. That's just one blade.
Yeah.
On one offshore wind turbine.
Yeah.
Imagine if a bunch of these things fell.
Yeah.
But, I think Massachusetts has a lot of decisions to make with its policies for energy and taxes, competitiveness, and that's what I'm hoping with the governor's race in 2 years from now, we can have these debates at the forefront and people can tune in.
Yeah, I think it's going to be necessary. Maybe I'll be there. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
I think it's going to be necessary because I really think that people, by the time, look at it this way, what we're doing today will translate into the future as well, right? So I think that the more people that, tune into what is going on and they become more accustomed to what is happening, because as you know, a lot of people don't, there's a good majority of people that don't care. They just pay their electric bill, they pay this, it's on auto pay, they don't care. But I've noticed that when people start to really care is either when they have kids and their kids are feeling it, right? Or somebody that's just getting out of college, they get a job, that's who's really feeling it. You know what I mean?
Hear that a lot. People's kids can't stay here. It's unaffordable.
Exactly. And now you have kids moving out of the state. You can't be close to your kids because they can't afford to live here, right? They're stuck in the basement, for 10 years, which I'm not saying that's an issue. I'm just saying that they don't have the same opportunities that the people before us had, right? Like the people of the past created the sins that we're living in today. And it only seems to be going in the same exact trajectory. And I think the longer that people wake up to these things, I think that could have some glimmers of hope, right? To where we could set like Massachusetts back on track to some extent.
No,
right?
yeah. I mean, it's never going to be like a red state or anything like that.
No, of course not.
It could be like a practical state, maybe.
Yeah.
Could we think about these decisions and maybe analyze the cost before we say yes?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I'm asking for at Massachusetts.
Yeah, there's no cost analysis done before implementation.
Like when a turbine breaks and falls in the ocean and it sits there for months and months, before we say let's expand the contract, can we say, well, what happens if another one breaks?
Yeah.
Or who's going to pay for that? Or when all of these blades need to be replaced, who will pay for that?
Will they be available?
Or how often do they have to replace? These are the practical questions I wish Healy would answer. But you see, even this week, she's out there with her secretary being we're pursuing offshore wind, blah, blah, blah. It's guys, just take a deep breath here. You don't have to stay so focused on a position that you were this time last year when things change.
They won't take the L. They won't take the loss.
No, they won't take the loss.
They won't take the loss.
When the state is, when people are bailing the state, when they're leaving the state, when the new administration is saying you can't do this, they're still not recognizing, read the room, guys. It's not working. It should be interesting. But I think with the governor's race, that will hopefully provoke some practical thought where people can kind of analyze this and say, well, what's the cost of all these ideas?
Yeah.
But Mike, I do want to give a shout out. So Mass Fiscal, we started in 2012. We're a nonprofit group. Check us out at massfiscal.org. We have a great staff, great team. I'm very proud of everyone that's working for the organization. They help make it so I can come on shows like this and speak intelligently and get some wins along the way of our policy fights.
Yeah.
We also have the Fiscal Alliance Foundation. That's our tax-deductible organization. And you can check us out on the web. So people that like to give tax-deductible donations can go there. But we started Mass Fiscal in 2012. And when we started, we kind of came in the scene when another group of taxpayer advocates were in the state doing really good work. And that's Citizens for Limited Taxation. They were started in the 70s. They had some tremendous success in Massachusetts with ballot questions, including Prop 2.5. That's one of their biggest success stories. And it's actually a law that is modeled around the country. It's like a famous pro-taxpayer law. Like if you're into pro-taxpayer stuff, which not everyone is, you know Prop 2.5. It is like in the rafters of the garden, if you will. It is super famous. So Barbara Anderson is this famous figure that advocated for the taxpayers. Her and her two colleagues, Chip Ford, Chip Faulkner, were doing this in the 70s, the 80s, and 90s, and the 2000s. And we wanted to start to kind of build on their legacy and defend their victories. So I talk about Prop 2.5. I think it's super important. The legislature is always trying to find gimmicky ways to try to gut Prop 2.5. We're always trying to push back, alert the public, and warn people about that. But we started because Prop 2 because CLT was around, but they were kind of slowing down. And Chip Ford is still with us. Unfortunately, God rest her soul, Barbara Anderson, Chip Faulkner passed away, but Chip Ford lives in Kentucky. I still talk to him about stuff a lot. He made a big press event saying he's handing over the reins to Mass Fiscal, which we're absolutely honored, and we will continue to do everything we can to preserve their victories for the taxpayers. But it's a great honor to wake up every day, and I have friends in other states like New Hampshire that say, why do you do what you do in Massachusetts? Like, just come to New Hampshire. In fact, some of the folks I know that work in New Hampshire are from Massachusetts. And I tell them, like, working in the industry of trying to help taxpayers in Massachusetts, you're like deployed. Like, you are if you think about it, like, you're behind enemy lines. You are there to disrupt the other side, to stop them in their tracks. I'm not sitting comfortably in a state where everything is already done and you're just protecting. I'm there, Mass Fiscal is there to try to stop the other side from advancing what they're trying to do. We're behind their enemy lines. We're on their turf right now. So it's fun. We're deployed. We're on active duty right now in Massachusetts. That's kind of how we have to look at it. Yeah. Doesn't mean we're always going to win, but when I run out of ammo, we'll throw rocks and then fist fight if we have to for the taxpayers. That's kind of how we look at it.
I think it's amazing what you guys are doing.
Well, thank you.
It really is. I think it's amazing, and you hit it perfectly, because people ask me, why do I still stay in the state, right? Mm-hmm. And there's this drive where you see things, you do a lot of comparison probably in data from other states and so on and so forth, and you know things could be better.
Yeah.
And if there wasn't an opportunity for things to be better, you wouldn't necessarily be here, right?
Yeah.
And I think you're doing a great service for this entire state, and I really appreciate having you on today. Definitely. If you want to wrap it up.
Yeah, and I would say, I don't think it's probably blue for sure, but it's not liberal. I think it's much more middle of the road.
Yeah.
And you see that with ballot questions. Oftentimes voters make the right decision, like on ranked choice voting. If you look at the millionaire's tax, that was the 7th time it was proposed before it finally passed. So all those other times it was rejected. 5 times of the ballot, 1 time by the state Supreme Court. And other questions come up on ballot questions, and the voters pick the right choice. So if you take away the party ID stuff, voters here are very practical. They're usually with us on most of these issues. So that's what kind of keep us going too. Yeah,
I think that it's important, and I think that hopefully they'll show up for the next election cycle.
Every cycle will show up.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah.
Thank you, Annie.
Thank you.
You can cut it, Ryan. That was excellent.
Thanks, guys.